Revolution of common sense.
Revolution of common sense.
A revolution of common sense.
Truth was once common sense, but today, truth is uncommon. Explore biblical truths around faith, business, and politics with Peter Demas. Uncommon sense in current times.
Hey folks, welcome to Uncommon Sense in Current Times. Today we're going to be talking about kind of our education system. I mean, frankly, it's been pretty pathetic for decades now. Since the Department of Education has started, we've gone from the best to worst, all the while spending more money than anyone else. And then the Education Department has now seemed like they've tried to take ownership of our children. So there's a lot of drama we're seeing around it. So today I'm excited to have Mat Staver. He's the founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel, a nonprofit dedicated to advancing religious freedom, the sanctity of life, family values. Former dean and tenured law professor at Liberty University School of Law. He's argued before the U.S. Supreme Court. He's authored several books on constitutional law. So I greatly appreciate him being here and taking his time for that. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So I'm curious. So you've described the Department of Education as created for political gain. So, do you see that being part of today's problems with our education system as a whole? Not just with the education, but with all the stuff that comes along with it.
I do. In fact, if you go back to 1979, pre-1979, we did not have a federal Department of Education. Things regarding education remained at the state level, but it was during the twilight hours of President Jimmy Carter's first term that in 1979, during the election cycle, he then pushed forward and created the Department of Education. And then Ronald Reagan, of course, was elected, but he did that so that he could really reach out and get the vote of the teachers with the teachers' unions so that he could placate them. And hey, he's working on doing education. He's going to make a federal Department of Education, make that a priority. So in 1979, if you go back to look at the United States ranking educationally, we were number one in the world. Now, if you look at where we are, we're like number 31, 32 in the world. We're in the 30s, and in the 30s, when you compare what other nations are there, that's Greece, Turkey, even New Mexico is in the 30s. So we're down in the New Mexico, or I should say Mexico, not New Mexico, but down in the Mexico range in the 30s. We've gone from number one to the 30s. And we are failing in a lot of different areas of math, sciences, and other kinds of literacy. So what has happened in the years since 1979? Every decade, what we find is that we are dropping 5 percentage points or 5 places in the rankings. So from 1979 to the present, every decade, we continue to go backwards. So right now we're in the 30s. If we have another 10 years, we'll be even worse than we are now, and another 10 years after that will be worse than we are now. So what is it doing? It's dumbing down education. It is a federal bureaucracy whose time has come. We should have ultimately abolished it a long time ago.
So, and that's coming to education. Obviously, the Supreme Court has ruled a while back that schools can act in loco parentis. They can take place of the parents over certain subjects, certain ideas. And now that seems to, I mean, we can't educate, and now they want to take over ownership of being the parents. Do you see a connection between the Department of Education and where we are with the gender ideology policies that we're seeing set forth here?
Yes, I don't think the U.S. Department of Education is the cause of all of those issues, but it's certainly part of the problem. We also have issues both on the state and local level that we need to root out. And what we're seeing right now is the school boards, instead of, honoring the parents as the individuals that have the best authority and decision-making for the welfare and education of their children, they are displacing the parents, and they could really care less in many cases about what the parents say. And in some cases, they're directly undermining and opposing the parents' religious and moral value choices, and they're hiding that from the parents. So that's one of the things that we've seen, particularly since COVID, that has been revealed. It's been there for a while. But the U.S. Department of Education is part of that problem as well, because it's an ideology that ultimately has developed within the public education bureaucratic system. And when you expand that from the state in some of the states or local areas are bad actors. Now you elevate that to a national level, and they have this enormous amount of power that really, frankly, is unchecked over education in general. You have a real problem. And so some of these ideologies that are being pushed by the U.S. Department of Education are ideological issues like DEI, LGBTQ, and other areas that are directly filtering down into the local school districts.
So when you talk about the Department of Education having great power, give me an example. Like what are probably the top three things in which they can influence what the local school districts are doing?
There's a couple of ways. Number one, I think, and most prominently, is accreditation, because the U.S. Department of Education accredits these different private organizations. Some of those will be national, like the American Bar Association. Others might be regional, or they used to be regional. Now they're more national with regards to colleges and universities and their educational requirements as well. So the U.S. Department of Education, they approve those entities. And those entities then go out and they do accreditation on the different schools. Those particular entities are really pushing LGBTQ. For example, the American Bar Association right now, a couple of years ago, recently changed some of its standards. And the standards had in their standards that in order to be an ABA accredited law school, you could not discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. So some of the law schools that were Christians said they don't discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation, thinking of ideas, what's going on in your mind, but they do based upon behavior. So if you act out what's going on in your mind, such as having same-sex relations, or alternatively, having opposite sex immorality, then the school will impose its doctrinal, mission statement and its position to deal with you as a student. Well, the ABA moved from that to gender identity. And gender identity is not just what your expression is, your external expression, but it's what's in your mind as well. And so I know, for example, the DOE tried to pressure Liberty University School of Law and other law schools that are Christian, like Regent University, to comply. Fortunately, those schools stood strong, and they're still standing strong. But they're really trying to push this gender ideology. And where is that coming from? That comes from the DOE. Now, the DOE may not be pushing that particularly, telling you that you have to do that, but the DOE has general policies that are trickling down into these accrediting agencies. And the DOE, frankly, has the ability to stop these accrediting bodies from pushing these ideologies on religious faith-based schools, and they're not doing it, particularly under the Biden administration. The other way that they're doing these kinds of things is, and in fact, that frankly has a huge impact, by the way, on education. As a former dean of Liberty University School of Law, I know the power of accrediting bodies over the direction and even the content of your school, whether it's a law school or other undergraduate schools. The DOE also came after Liberty University and Grand Canyon University. Those particular schools are the largest Christian schools in the country by far. There's nothing else that's even compared to those two schools. And so what they did is they came after both of them and issued the largest fines ever in the history of education against those two schools within the last year, within the last 12 months under the Biden administration. And we're talking about tens and tens of millions of dollars in fines against these schools. Whereas if you look at, for example, the Sandusky situation, where you had the blatant sexual cover-up of the university, and it was well known, and they covered it up to protect their sports, it was about a $2.5 million fine compared to, I think it was $37 million fine against Grand Canyon.
Oh my goodness.
And they wanted 30-some million against Liberty, and I think it ended up to be about $14 or $15 million. So those fines against Christian schools dwarfed anything that they did against these secular public schools that were openly and blatantly trying to cover up sexual assault and molestation on their campuses.
Was that, and I did not realize those numbers are significant, especially when you compare the two. Is it possible that the previous administration was trying just to set the tone of, you don't challenge me, well, no matter what, we're going to tell you, and if you challenge me, it's going to be tremendously worse, not compared to crime versus crime, or I won't even call them crime. Well, one's definitely a crime, but violation versus violation. Why do you think that's more of the reason than it was anything else?
Well, I think the reason really was the fact that these were Christian schools, and they're the largest Christian schools in the country, and they became a big target of the Department of Education under the Biden administration. And so over the years, since 1979, the DOE has become weaponized, and we see that very easily within the Biden administration. Now, right now, it's not weaponized, but what happens if you have another president after Donald Trump? You have somebody like a Biden or Kamala Harris. Well, what they'll do is they'll weaponize it again. And what they'll do to the accrediting bodies is they'll tell them, and this is one of the things that we were concerned about during the Biden administration, that they must actually have as part of their accrediting criteria to approve a school to be accredited, that they must actually engage in a pro-LGBTQ agenda. And that would include the gender identity as well. And if a school did not follow that, and they would not violate their religious and Christian doctrine, for example, then they would lose accreditation. Now, what would that mean for the school? Well, it would mean a lot. If the undergrads want to go on to a master's program or a doctoral program, and they're graduating from a non-accredited school, that other school may not accept the credits. Alternatively, if they wanted to get student loans, if you're not accredited, then you're not going to get student loans from the Federal Department of Education position, being non-accredited. Also, the DOE was pushing the Title IX rewrite. We saw that happen during the Biden administration. Title IX was designed to protect women in sports, to allow opportunities. It was not designed to literally destroy women's sports by allowing men and boys to go into women's sports and compete directly against women, and to go in their private spaces to invade their privacy. And yet that's what the Biden administration was doing, using the DOE to try to reinterpret the rules. So accreditation is a big one, fines is a big one, and then reinterpreting the rules of Title IX and other laws against these Christian faith-based schools.
So I have a magic wand. I wipe out the Department of Education today. How do schools get accredited at that point in time? Like, what would have to happen for me not to say, hey, I'm going to have a university here, and and have all the same and open the door for a lot of possible theft and other types of nefarious activities that way?
Well, as a dean of the law school and somebody who also was involved in the accreditation process of undergraduate schools, on the one hand, can it help schools? Yeah, it can help schools. But on the other hand, what happens is it requires more cost for inputs rather than outputs. In other words, results are not necessarily the criteria used to judge accreditation in many of these situations under these standards. It's the inputs.
Oh, wow.
It's, for example, the law school library. Let's take a look at that from a law school standpoint. Why do we still need these massive law school libraries that cost lots and lots of money, millions of dollars to keep up, and subscriptions to constantly monitor, when everything is done on electronic databases now? You don't need these massive libraries. So what does that do? It increases the cost of education to the law student, because that's passed on to the law student because it's got to be passed on somewhere. So if you eliminate some of that criteria that they use as inputs, as opposed to measuring outputs, the results of the education, you would decrease the cost of education, whether it's law school or otherwise. And I think you would improve quality, let the market speak for itself. Moreover, beyond the DOE authorizing certain accrediting bodies can still exist. For example, paralegal. You can be a paralegal in different law firms, and you can be a paralegal without being certified. But there's also private organizations that provide certification, and you can then become more valuable if you've gone through that certification process. It's not a requirement for a paralegal, but it's like continuing education that certifies you as a more qualified person that has gone through additional training and testing. That's a process, I think, that can be done in the private sector outside of the Federal Department of Education. So the education issue with regards to accreditation is probably one of the least of my concerns.
So, well, Let's go to the law piece of it. I wasn't quite sure where to twist on this one here because, I'm a lawyer. I've also, gone through an accredited law school. However, when I think about some of the great lawyers throughout history, whether it's Clarence Darrow, Abraham Lincoln, Daniel Webster, obviously they didn't go through an accredited university because it wasn't around at the time for it. So even when you're looking at law and you're in order to take the bar exam, you have to pass a law school of some form or fashion, and then to have reciprocity where I can go to another state, I'd have to be at an accredited law school. If it's not accredited, then I can maybe able to stay within the state that I'm happen to be in. In this particular situation, is there any value at all for anyone to even? Should we even have that as the purpose of going to law school? If I can do it all on my own, study it on my own, pass the bar on my own, why do I need to worry about whether it's an accredited or unaccredited law school in order to learn from it if I can pass an extremely difficult test?
Yeah, it's a very difficult test. And really, the test should be your ultimate determiner. Can you pass this test, and is it objective? Does it actually measure your ability to practice law? Well, if you go to California, for example, they have state accreditation and ABA accreditation. So some of the schools there are accredited only in the state. And so you can take the bar in that state, but you may not be able to necessarily have reciprocity in another state if you only graduate from a state accredited school. Massachusetts School of Law, they have chosen not to go through ABA accreditation. So they're state accredited. And then they've gone to other states to say, look, at the quality of our law school program, and allow our students to take the bar. And they've been very successful in persuading different states to do so. And if you go back to the original accreditation process with the ABA, when we had the ABA come into existence, there were a number of historically black law schools. Well, the ABA, just like the American Medical Association, had a bias against people of color. And so when the ABA came in, what happened to the historically black law schools? They went out of existence. Wow. Now you're seeing them come back into existence. Florida's an example. Florida A&M University used to have a law school. After accreditation came in, it went out of existence several years ago. It finally resurrected, and now there's a law school that is part of Florida A&M University. It's located now in Orlando, whereas the main university is in another part of the state. But you see what happened when they came into accreditation, and the historically black law schools went out of existence. And that was by design from the ABA, and that's pretty much part of their well-known history. And then over the time of the ABA has had some difficulty. In fact, they had a 10-year anti-competitive consent decree for antitrust violations, where they had to operate for 10 years under the DOJ consent decree. Why? Because they were setting salaries of professors. So they would go to, these were attorneys that would be on the accrediting bodies and also members of law schools. So they would gather all the data for salaries, and they would go to another school when they went through the reaffirmation of accreditation. And they would say, how much are your professors being paid? Let me see. Oh, your professors are underpaid. They might be the best professor on that particular subject matter in the entire country. They would say they're underpaid. You need to raise the price that you're paying to them in order to be accredited. That's what, among other things, got them into trouble with the Federal Department of Justice, where they were literally setting salaries. They don't do that now, but this was being done under the watch of the DOE, and the DOE didn't do anything to stop it. It resulted in a federal lawsuit by the Department of Justice that ultimately stopped the ABA from doing this.
So how do we handle now? Because if the Department of Education is again wiped out, what about situations concerning special needs children? I know that's one of the concerns of families that have special needs, that they're worried about if the Department of Education goes away, because there seems to be a greater protection at that federal level for children with special needs. Is the answer just shift to states?
I think the answer better is to shift to states. Instead of having our dollars go to the Federal Department of Education, and by the way, the average salary of the federal DOE workers is $150,000 and up. And what are they doing? They're a bunch of bureaucrats that are trying to micromanage education on the state and local level. wipe it away. Any kind of dollars need to go back to the states. Let the states deal with this. Certainly, there's going to be a lot, there may not have been as much effort on the state level in the 1970s to deal with people with certain kinds of disabilities and special needs. But I think certainly we have come to that position now. And I don't think the citizens of any state are going to tolerate not being able to do something with special needs students in their state. And I frankly think that states and local schools would be able to do a lot more if their hands were freed and if the money stayed in the states as opposed to going to Washington, D.C.
Now, what prevents states from being even worse than the Department of Education? I mean, I can think of right now a few states in my mind: Michigan, Illinois, California, New York. There's quite a few out there that I think could tell the Department of Education, hold my beer and let's see what we can do. How do we prevent that from occurring and them targeting religious schools within their own states?
Well, they can do that now. I mean, the federal Department of Education isn't going to stop those schools in those education departments in those various states from becoming even more radical than they are. So there's not a limitation. There's not a governor, if you will, on the engine in these various states like California, New York, and some others. I think what we have to do in those particular states is, elections may not change it, so litigation has to be the answer. Where there's litigation against those runaway Department of Educations on the state level, or particularly in the schools. For example, the case out of Montgomery County, Maryland, that was argued last week before the United States Supreme Court. That's a case where they are pushing the LGBTQ indoctrination as young as, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and on up. The parents simply just wanted to be able to opt out. And that ended up in a federal lawsuit that's now before the United States Supreme Court, which I think the Supreme Court will now side with the parents to allow them to have a religious opt-out from this objectionable curriculum. So I think that's how we're going to have to deal with it. So
now that we kind of move from that area, I mean, because with Liberty Counsel, y'all do an amazing work, by the way, do an incredible job. There are a lot of people who are experiencing some of this pushback, either from local, state, that may be kind of trickling down from the Department of Education. For those who are out there who are experiencing it, who are seeing it, who are seeing their children either being brainwashed or they're seeing, just flat discrimination against their religious views, how do y'all help? What do you do for those that are out there listening to this that might know somebody or might be experiencing something themselves?
Well, Liberty Counsel, we work nationwide in all 50 states and territories, and we do this pro bono. So you can go to our website, lc.org. Right there on the website, there's a drop-down screen for legal help, the tab. Click on that, fill that out. We'll be back in touch with you. Or you can contact us directly by phone, and that number is 407-875-1776. It's 407-875-1776, or just go to the website lc.org. Everything is there. So contact us if it's you that is involved, or you know someone or some situation, even though it's not your child or your specific situation, but it's going on in your community. Let us know. Contact us. We'll be able to get involved and help, and we'll be able to provide counsel and, if necessary, litigation support. And we work with parents, we work with students, we work with teachers and staff all over the country in all the different areas of school.
Well, I appreciate all that you do. Y'all do an incredible job in being able to help people and fight for our fundamental freedoms, and I greatly appreciate it, and I appreciate this conversation and us having this here. Is there anything else that you would like people to know before we go?
I would say this, that the paradigm of education is changing, and we need to make education great again. Instead of MAGA, it's MEGA, make education great again. And I think we have a great opportunity that we've never had before. We have a president of the United States, Donald Trump, who is willing to do what many presidents have talked about, but they didn't have the will to actually carry it out, and that is abolish the federal Department of Education. I think that's a good step. That's not anti-education, that's pro-education. Return the control back to the states and the local area, and particularly to parents. The second thing I think is online education is a wave of the future. That's why we created Covenant Journey Academy, which is a 24/7, 365 K through 12 online Christian academy with 6 foreign languages, over 150 courses, over 300 options of different kinds of courses you can take all over the world. And it's self-paced anytime, lots of different opportunities that are happening within online education as well. So I think we are living at a significant time where the whole education model is changing. And frankly, I think it's for the good, because if we want to continue to make the same mistakes, just continue to follow the same old roadmap. But it has failed us, particularly the public education system. I think that is clearly changing, and we're actually being a part of it.
I think you summed it up all throughout very, very well, which is we need to be more results driven than anything else, whether it's accreditation, look at the output, whether in this particular situation, we clearly, the results have been that since 1979, we're going in the wrong direction, and we continue to do so. So again, I thank you so much for talking with us about it and letting us know, and anything we can do to help support Liberty Counsel, let us know.
Thank you. My pleasure to be with you.
All right. Thank you.